They used to call me the charity case. Not to my face at first. At first, it was small comments whispered across dinner tables. Little jokes that stopped whenever I walked into the room. My wife's family came from money, real money, and I was the guy who showed up in an old sedan, worked long hours, and didn't have a last name that opened doors. To them, I was the man their daughter had settled for. And for 6 years, I let it go. I smiled through the jokes. I ignored the disrespect. I told myself that keeping the peace was more important than proving a point. But eventually, you learn something painful. When you keep accepting disrespect in silence, people stop seeing your silence as kindness. They start seeing it as permission. My name is Daniel, and this is the story of how my wife's family spent years treating me like I wasn't good enough for her, until one night, in front of everyone they cared about, they had no choice but to publicly admit exactly how wrong they had been. But this isn't a story about screaming, revenge, or humiliating someone for entertainment. It's about boundaries. It's about quiet success. And it's about what happens when the people who judge you based on your past are forced to confront the person you became. Welcome back to Calm Verdict Stories. If you enjoy powerful stories about family drama, karma, betrayal, respect, boundaries, and personal growth, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this story is for anyone who has ever been treated like they weren't good enough, simply because someone else thought they had the right to measure their worth. I met my wife, Olivia, when I was 28. At the time, I was working as an operations coordinator for a regional logistics company. It wasn't glamorous. I wasn't making 6 figures. I didn't wear expensive watches or talk about stock portfolios at dinner. But I worked hard. I had grown up in a working-class neighborhood. My dad drove a delivery truck for 30 years. My mom worked at a daycare center. We didn't have much, but we had stability, honesty, and a family that showed love by showing up. Olivia came from the opposite world. Her father, Richard, owned a commercial real estate company. Her mother, Patricia, chaired charity committees and knew everyone worth knowing in their city. Her older brother, Grant, worked in private equity and had the kind of personality that made every conversation feel like a competition. Their family home was enormous. Not just nice, enormous. The first time Olivia invited me there for dinner, I spent 20 minutes sitting in my car beforehand, trying to calm myself down. I had borrowed a blazer from my cousin because I didn't own one that felt appropriate. I checked my shoes twice. I told myself not to talk too much, not to talk too little, not to say anything that made me sound out of place. Olivia noticed I was nervous. She took my hand before we walked in and said, "They can be intense, but they'll love you once they know you." I wanted to believe her. Her mother was polite at first. Too polite. The kind of polite that makes you feel like you're being interviewed rather than welcomed. "What did you say you do again, Daniel?" "Operations coordination," I said. "For a logistics company." "Oh," Patricia said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So you manage deliveries?" I explained that I handled scheduling, vendor relationships, inventory planning, and process improvements. She nodded slowly. "That sounds useful." Then Richard asked where I went to school. When I told him I had attended community college for 2 years before taking a job, there was a pause. Grant looked down at his plate and smiled. "Smart," he said. "Avoided all that student debt." "I did," I said. He nodded. "And I guess you don't really need a degree for logistics." Olivia squeezed my hand beneath the table. I told myself it was fine. I told myself they were just getting to know me. But the comments didn't stop after that dinner. They got worse. At Olivia's cousin's wedding, Grant introduced me to someone by saying, "Daniel keeps the country's packages moving." Basically, if your online order arrives late, blame him. Everyone laughed. At Thanksgiving, Patricia asked if I planned to upgrade my career before Olivia and I had children. At Christmas, Richard gave me a book about investing and said, every man should understand how to build real wealth. I thanked him. Even though I knew he had never given me a gift that wasn't somehow meant to remind me that I didn't belong. Olivia defended me when we were alone. She would say, I'm sorry. They don't realize how they sound. And I loved her, so I tried to be patient. But there is a difference between someone not realizing how they sound and someone repeatedly choosing not to care. We got married 2 years after we met. Our wedding was beautiful, but even then, her family found ways to make me feel small. Richard offered to pay for most of it. I appreciated the help. I truly did. But during the rehearsal dinner, he stood up to give a speech and said, when Olivia was young, we always imagined she would marry someone who could take care of her. Luckily, Daniel seems like a nice enough young man, and we're confident Olivia will continue taking care of herself. The room laughed. Not everyone. But enough people. I remember standing there beside Olivia, smiling for photographs, feeling like my face had turned to stone. Olivia looked embarrassed. Later, she cried and apologized. But I asked her something that I had been avoiding for a long time. Why do they think they're allowed to speak about me like that? She didn't know what to say. And honestly, neither did I. So I kept trying to earn their respect. That was my mistake. For years, I believed that if I worked harder, saved more, dressed better, spoke more confidently, and achieved enough, they would finally stop treating me like an outsider. I thought respect was something I had to win. But respect should be the starting point. Not the prize you get after surviving someone's cruelty. Still, I kept going. At work, I was moving up. I had a talent for seeing problems other people ignored. Our company was losing money because their shipping routes were inefficient, their vendors were poorly managed, and communication between departments was a mess. I spent months studying the system after hours. I built a proposal. Most people thought it was too ambitious. But my supervisor believed in me. The company gave me a small team and 6 months to implement the changes. By the end of that year, we had reduced delivery delays, cut major costs, and improved client retention. I was promoted to operations manager. Then director. Then, 3 years later, I was offered an opportunity one never expected. A former client approached me about joining a startup that was developing logistics software for small and mid-sized companies. They needed someone who understood the problems from the ground up, not someone who had only studied them from a boardroom. They offered me equity. Not a huge salary at first. Not the kind of money Richard would be impressed by. But ownership. A chance to build something. Olivia and I talked about it for weeks. We had a mortgage by then. We had a young daughter, Emma. The safe choice was staying where I was. But Olivia looked at me one night after Emma fell asleep and said, "You've spent years trying to prove yourself to people who may never be satisfied. What would you do if you only had to prove it to yourself?" That question changed everything. I took the offer. And for the next 4 years, I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. I missed parties. I missed vacations. I slept in airports. I took calls in parking lots. I learned how to negotiate, hire, fire, lead, sell, and survive. There were months when I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. And during those hard years, Olivia's family got even worse. At one family dinner, Grant asked me how the little app company was doing. I said we were growing. He laughed and said, "Everyone's growing until they run out of investor money." At another event, Patricia asked Olivia if she was worried about the instability. Olivia said, "No. I believe in my husband." Patricia smiled and replied, "Belief is wonderful, sweetheart. But it doesn't pay for private school." Olivia stared at her mother. I could tell she wanted to respond. But I shook my head slightly. Not because I agreed. Because I was tired. Tired of explaining. Tired of defending. Tired of allowing their opinions to take up space in my mind. So I stopped talking about my work around them. If they asked, I gave simple answers. It's going well. We're busy. Things are moving forward. That was it. No details. No numbers. No invitations for them to judge something they didn't understand. Then, in our 5th year, everything changed. Our software company landed a partnership with a national retail group. It was the kind of deal that transformed us overnight. We hired more people. We expanded into 3 new states. We moved into a larger office. My equity, which had once seemed like a risky gamble, became worth more than I had ever imagined. But the biggest change wasn't financial. It was internal. For the first time, I stopped seeing Richard, Patricia, and Grant as people I needed to impress. They were just people. Flawed people. People who had confused money with character. And once I understood that, their comments lost their power. A few months later, Olivia's parents announced they were hosting their annual charity gala. This gala was their biggest event of the year. Hundreds of guests attended, local business owners, city officials, lawyers, investors, doctors, and friends of the family. Patricia treated it like the social event of the season. Richard treated it like a business networking opportunity. Every year, they asked Olivia and me to attend. Every year, I went because Olivia wanted me there. This time was different. A few weeks before the gala, I received a call from the event coordinator. She told me they had chosen our company as the evening's featured community sponsor because of a new program we had launched. Our company had started offering free logistics support and technology tools to small local food banks, helping them distribute supplies more efficiently. The coordinator said the board wanted me to speak for 5 minutes about the program. I was quiet for a moment. Then I asked, "Does Richard know?" She paused. "No," she said. "The board approved it independently." I almost said no. I didn't want the attention. I didn't need Richard's face to turn pale while I stood on a stage. But then I thought about something. For years, I had made myself smaller to make them comfortable. I had avoided talking about my work because I didn't want another joke. I had accepted disrespect because I thought responding would make me look bitter. And I realized that declining this opportunity would be another way of hiding. So I said yes. The night of the gala, Olivia wore a dark blue dress and looked more nervous than I had ever seen her. "You don't have to do this," she told me in the car. "I know," I said. "But you're going to?" "Yes." She reached for my hand. "I'm proud of you," she said. That was all I needed. When we arrived, Patricia was standing near the entrance greeting guests. She smiled when she saw Olivia. Then she looked at me. "Daniel," she said. "You clean up nicely." I smiled. "Thank you." Grant walked over a few minutes later, holding a drink. He looked at my suit and said, "Wow. Startup money must be treating you better than expected." I looked at him calmly. "It's treating a lot of people well," I said. He laughed like he didn't understand what I meant. Richard barely acknowledged me. He was busy shaking hands with people from the city council and talking to potential investors. The ballroom was full by the time dinner began. The event coordinator introduced several speakers. Richard gave a welcome speech about community, responsibility, and the importance of helping people build better futures. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I had spent years watching him speak beautifully about values he rarely practiced at home. Then the coordinator returned to the stage. "Tonight," she said, We want to recognize a business leader whose company has made an extraordinary impact on local food distribution. Richard looked around the room. Patricia smiled politely. Grant checked his phone. Then the coordinator said my name. For a second, the room was completely still. I stood up. Olivia's hand found mine. And as I walked toward the stage, I saw each of their faces change. Richard looked confused. Patricia looked shocked. Grant looked like someone had taken the air out of him. I stepped up to the microphone. The lights were bright. The room was silent. And I had every opportunity to make that moment about them. I could have told the room how Richard once mocked my job. I could have repeated Grant's jokes about my little app company. I could have explained how Patricia questioned whether I could provide for my own family. But I didn't. I talked about the food banks. I talked about the warehouse workers, coordinators, drivers, volunteers, and small business owners who kept communities running when no one was watching. I said, the people who do the most important work are often the people we underestimate. They may not have the loudest voices, the most impressive titles, or the right connections. But they show up. They solve problems. They build things that matter. Then I looked toward Olivia. And sometimes, the greatest thing someone can do for another person is simply believe in them before everyone else does. Olivia was crying. Not loudly. Just quietly, with one hand over her mouth. The applause started slowly. Then it filled the room. When I stepped off the stage, people came over to shake my hand. Business owners asked questions about our program. A city official told me they wanted to discuss expanding it. A food bank director hugged me and said our software had changed the way they served families. And then Richard approached me. For the first time in 6 years, he looked nervous. Daniel, he said, I had no idea. I nodded. You never asked. He looked down. Patricia came over beside him. Her eyes were glossy. I think we owe you an apology, she said. I could have said, you think? I could have reminded her of every comment, every insult disguised as concern, every time she made Olivia feel like she had married beneath her. But I didn't. I said, I think you owe Olivia one too. She spent years defending her choice to be with me. Patricia looked at her daughter. Olivia was standing a few feet away, still surrounded by people congratulating her. Richard took a slow breath. Then he did something I never expected. He walked toward the stage. He asked the coordinator if he could have the microphone. The coordinator looked surprised but handed it to him. The entire ballroom gradually became quiet again. Richard stood there in front of everyone, the same room where he had spent years building his image as a respected businessman and community leader. Then he said, before we continue, I need to say something. Patricia stood beside him. Grant looked frozen near the table. Richard looked directly at me. For years, I judged my son-in-law based on the wrong things. I judged him based on where he came from, what he earned, and whether his career looked impressive to me. The room was silent. He continued. I failed to see his work ethic, his integrity, and the way he loved and supported my daughter. I treated him as though he had something to prove to me. The truth is, I had something to learn from him. Patricia took the microphone next. Her voice shook. We were cruel in ways we called jokes. We made assumptions. We made Daniel feel unwelcome in a family he should have been welcomed into from the beginning. Then she looked at Olivia. And we made our daughter feel like she had to defend the person she loved. We are deeply sorry. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I had one. I just felt quiet. Because the apology wasn't about the audience. It was about accountability. Grant didn't say anything that night. Not at first. But the next morning, he called me. He said, I didn't know what to say last night. I said, you could start with the truth. There was a long silence. Then he said, I was jealous. That surprised me. He explained that his job looked impressive from the outside, but he had spent years feeling trapped by it. He hated that I had taken a risk he was too afraid to take. And instead of admitting that, he treated my ambition like a joke. I made you the target because it was easier than admitting I wasn't happy, he said. I told him I appreciated his honesty. But I also told him something important. Understanding why you hurt someone doesn't erase the hurt. He agreed. And over time, he changed. Not overnight. Not perfectly. But he changed. He started asking about my work without making jokes. He stopped treating every conversation like a contest. He even started showing up to Emma's school events instead of arriving late and talking about himself. Richard and Patricia changed too. They started inviting my parents to family events. They made an effort to know them, not as the parents of the man who married their daughter, but as people. One Sunday, Richard sat with my dad in the backyard for nearly 2 hours talking about delivery routes, work schedules, and old trucks. My dad later told me, your father-in-law is complicated. I laughed and said, that's one word for it. But my dad smiled. He's trying. And sometimes, trying is where change begins. The greatest lesson I learned from all of it was this: you cannot force people to respect you. You cannot argue someone into seeing your value. You cannot spend your whole life trying to earn a seat at a table where people benefit from making you feel small. But you can build your life. You can protect your peace. You can set boundaries without becoming cruel. And when the truth finally becomes impossible for people to ignore, you don't need to destroy them with it. You simply let it stand. My wife's family mocked me for years. They called me small. They called me unstable. They treated me like I was lucky Olivia chose me. But I was never trying to become worthy of them. I was trying to become worthy of myself. And in the end, the public apology wasn't my revenge. It was the consequence of them finally seeing the truth. Thank you for watching Calm Verdict Stories. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below. Have you ever had to set boundaries with people who judged you or treated you like you weren't good enough? Subscribe for more stories about family karma, respect, boundaries, betrayal, personal growth, and life lessons. Until next time, stay calm, stay focused, and never let anyone else define your worth.